This week I'm showing how I redid my tub shower. It's all part of my remodel of a bathroom. You can check the link here. I'm going to put a copy for the playlist. It's going to show all. I'm going to be doing the floor, the vanities, all of that. So this week I'm doing the cement board. I've already demolished everything, so I'm doing the cement board and laying the tile. It went pretty long just because it was a lot of work, so I'm going to be showing the grouting the next week. But check out the description link below. I have the playlist there, all the different tools that I used, and feel free to comment on the video and let me know, maybe something I was doing wrong. I'm obviously not a pro at tiling, and I'm sure there's plenty of pros out there. I don't know if they'll watch this, but I'd be interested in seeing any techniques, any improvements. So take a look at watch the video, and you can hopefully feel my pain. I had these small tiles. They were like less than 3 inches and I think 11 inches. So I had to do like 320 tiles. So it took a while. It was a lot of work, but I was really happy the way it came out. This is what the bathtub looked like after the demolition. You can take a look at the playlist and see the other video showing they get to that point. And you can actually see the lighter color. I was shimming the pieces out, and then I had to put some blocking on the side just because after pulling out the drywall. So you can see there's the shims, and I'm just kind of making sure that it's flat. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. I just kind of try to fix it as best you can with the tiles and get it as square as possible. And here's a reason why you put up cement board, not drywall. You can see all this mold right here. It's not too bad, but it's not great. So before I've put up the cement board, I wanted to get off all the old caulk because I'm actually going to be refinishing the tub. You don't have to do this if you're not refinishing, but it's good to just kind of get it as clean as possible so you get a good seal. So I use a scraper. That's why I wasn't as worried. And then this Brillo pad just to kind of clear it up. Again, I'm refinishing it, so I wasn't as worried. And then I didn't have a nook or like had a little niche, a previous one or in the existing. So that's why I'm putting this blocking here to create that. And you want to make this obviously as square as possible, just like anything. Save yourself some work. So square in the corners, and then leaning forward a little bit. You can fix this with a tile, but you just don't want leaning backwards so that water collects in the back, during a shower. So here it is, just kind of showing you how I started off with the cement board. I have it on these, I think they're like 8-inch blocks. I put it on there just so it's not sitting directly on the tub, and then you screw it in. I'll use the tiles to get it a little bit closer to the tub. You want a little bit of a gap just so that there's a place for the caulk. Or I'm actually using silicone, but you want that to be able to, seal that. So just like drywall, hit all the studs. So I have these special ones that are made by this company, specifically for this cement board called. So you can see just Durock. So they show the schedule of how far apart they want them to be. Obviously you can only hit the studs going the lateral way, but I'm just making this as solid as possible so it doesn't flex, especially when you're sealing. And it just acts just like drywall. You can cut it, but I'm having to cut the corner out here, or 3 sides to get into that little nook to cover it. So I'm using an oscillating tool. Found it was the easiest way just to cut through this. And you can see I measured from the back of the board, so this wasn't very great. So I ended up shifted to the side, but I was able to fix it. Just cut it the other way, fix it. You can see it right there, and then just shift that piece over. I'm going to be sealing all these joints, just like you do in drywall. You don't need to make it as flat as drywall. You just need to make it sealed. So you put the mesh over there and some thin set. And you can see I'm just making sure it's flat as best I can. Again, just save yourself some work when you're trying to do tile and trying to adjust. It's a lot easier to fix it when you're putting up the rough in like this. See, there's some cutouts I had to do for the drain there, for the spout, for the shower head. Doesn't have to be perfect again. I was off a little bit, but you can fix it with the tiles. Same way, screw it all in, make it solid just so it's not flexing, because you obviously don't want it to flex and crack or flex and break any joints. Here's a standard way. If I was just when I'm making straight cuts, the same way you do with drywall again. Score it, break it, and take it back, break the back side. And here it is, all done, just a rough in of the all the pieces that need to be there. So you can see the nook even needs to have it, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, I'm going to be putting a mesh over the joints and the corners and all that. And just use standard thin set, so I'm just mixing it up. I'm using white here just because that's what I'm going to be using for the tile as well, because I'm using the white tiles, white grout, so I don't want to have anything dark. And here's that mesh that's made specifically for this cement board. Again, it looks just like drywall, but so just putting it up there again just to make a nice seal, because I'm going to be coming over with a seal with that RedGard. But you wanted to have a smooth surface all the way around so that you can make a flat surface to cover over. So it's pretty simple. Just go across all that. Here's the thin set that I mixed up. Put it in. Again, acting like drywall, but you don't have to make it perfectly flat because it's going to be covered up with tile. So you want to cover up all the joints. Same way, cover up all the screw holes as well. Double check after you do the screw holes, because I had a couple that I missed that were on, I think that black printing, or just, I don't know why, it doesn't seem like they should be able to miss, but they're just hidden. So you can see I'm just just sealing it, making sure all the cracks are sealed around here. You don't do the joint up to the ceiling. I'm just gonna silicone that, but here is what it looks like. You see it's not perfect, but it's good enough just to need a solid barrier all the way around. And then still working on the back side, but just showing you what it looks like when it's done. And then you just let that dry. And then the unfortunate having to clean up, which is of course a pain, especially when this thin set sets a little bit. And here it is now. After this is the next day, I let all that dry, all the thin set, and I'm going to be doing a RedGard. So you want to cover your hands. Cover anything you need. This stuff is pretty noxious, so I have a breathing mask on specifically for vapors as well. It's very strong. I have it sealed off in the room. You can see it's pretty thick here. It's like, I don't even know what it's like. It's obviously thicker than paint, but it goes on pink, and then once it's dried, it dries to a red color, so you know. And I put 2 coats on, so let it dry in between. So it comes on. You can see how it's a lot easier now that I've sealed all the joints in the corners. It just goes on just like paint. Cut in around the corners, around the sides, around anything where you can't get it in with a roller, and then come in with a roller. So you see I have eye protection on, a hat, everything, so I'm covered up, so I don't get, because again this stuff was pretty strong. So you can see just roll in. Where you're cutting, doesn't really matter whether if one part dries faster than the other. Really, this thing just dries to a kind of a waxy plastic coating, and it gives you a solid seal all around. So if you could kind of see where I cut in, where it's a little bit darker, where you can see right now doesn't show up perfect, but it's a lot darker where it's dry, and where I just ran that brand new over the top. You can see it's a light pink, but you can see what you end up with is a sealed vapor barrier all the way around. So once I got that up, let it dry, I started working on cutting the tiles or just testing it out. You really need a tile saw if you're using, I was doing tiny tiles like this. They were smaller than 3-inch, which took a really long time, but I was just making sure the saw worked. Actually, I ended up having to replace the blade. It wasn't doing well. But before I actually start laying out the tile, it's very important, I'll talk a little bit later about it, is to make sure you find out where everything is square. You can see this is off a little bit, so you need to adjust the tiles a little bit. And I'm looking at all my vertical surfaces here. Anywhere where there's corners, just get a good layout, or understanding what's square and what's not square. And then again, plan that out, and then have all the tools ready to go. So it's your spacers, whether you're doing 16th inch, I was doing 16th here, 8-inch, whatever it is. You need your tile or your grout. I'm sorry, the trowel that makes the grooves. Get all that ready before you mix up the thin set, and also have a level. It's very important to have that, so you can just keep track and checking it every level or so. And what I'm doing here, as I mentioned, is if it was out of tilted, and then this was your starting line, and you ran all your tiles all the way to the left here, your grout line would end up running parallel to that unparalleled corner. And so what I actually did was pre-cut or I knew it was off by about 1/4 inch, which isn't too bad. Or I think it was maybe a little bit over 1/4. Anyways, so I pre-cut that 1/4 inch, and then because I knew this was less at the bottom here, and then started it off with a slightly smaller tile. So as the corner moved away, I was able to keep that line parallel. So you can see I'm just starting off. It's always hard getting the first row going, so I like to just do 1 or 2 at a time. I know it's not as efficient, but I was just trying to get the gapping right. I haven't tiled in a really long time, so I was kind of practicing. So you just groove the thin set, and then you can back butter. Some people say you don't need to. I like to do it just to make sure I got a good coating. And then I actually have a spacer that's sitting on the tub, so that's sitting on there and it keeps that spacing. So once it's all done, I'll have a little bit of a space so that when I go in silicone to try to seal that gap, it'll have a place it can go in. So you can see I get the first one set, work on the second one, and then I make sure they're parallel. Again, just trying to test it out, see how these tile lay. So just making sure it's flat, and then I also check just to make sure it's parallel along the top. So you can see I did a couple of rows and then decided to start working on this other side. And then this is an edge. So if you don't have a bull nose on your tile, you can put this on and run the tile up against that and give it a finished look. Make sure you don't go up all one wall and then start doing other walls. I found it's good, at least for the first couple rows, to do all 3 of the rows or the walls or whatever walls you do. So you see I'm doing this the same way. Just because you can end up out of square as you move from one side to the other. And here's an example where that edge guide wasn't perfect, so I had to adjust it a little bit. But you want to work on get the gap there for the grout. You want it to be able to be flush, so you have to pick the right size of that end piece for the thickness of your tile. So you can see here I've done a couple rows, or I think I did 4 or 5 here, and then work it into the corner. So I used that edge guide as my starting line, and then ran into the corner, and then the corner gets cut. So just remember, where you cut is where you're going to have a grout line or an edge. So if I'm looking straight on, I wouldn't see it. So here I did 2, and then I started working around this way, this other edge, before I went too far. And you can see that the tub wasn't actually perfectly level. I actually had to do a little bit larger gap on this side. I think it ended up being like a little over 1/8. But I figured it out and got that so that they're all running parallel around. And then here's the first cut I had to make before this. I didn't have any cut, so I just, most of it gets cut by or covered over. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I just wanted to, I used a tile saw here just to cut to the depth, the size I wanted. And then I just used a kerfing kind of maneuver here where I just kerfed it a couple times so that when I go break it, and then I just used my grinder and went in here and just kind of broke it up, all the little pieces off of there, and then just smoothed it out, because that's really all I needed. There's plenty of cover from the tub spout that's going to close over that, so it didn't have to be perfect. This wasn't too bad. I only need to make a cut in one of the tiles. And you can see I had both the spacers in there set up already. So you just kind of get it lined up there, work it into the thin set a little bit, make sure it's flat, and just as I mentioned, just every couple rows, just keep making sure it's not moving out of parallel. So you can see I had to make one cut on the right hand side. You can always kind of figure out, do I want to make I want to center the cut, do I want to do the left side? But turned out that's what I thought was the easiest. So I came up with the much larger cut here. The tiles are kind of small, so it's going to span across a couple of them here. This is for the water valve where you turn on. So you can see I made a template out of cardboard. I thought that was the easiest. Kind of lined it up with the spacers just on the ground here with 3 tiles that I knew, or actually 6 tiles, and then laid it out this way and drew it, and then just make sure it covered up right, and then mark X ones I want to cut, and then I just did that same kerfing method. And then this was the next challenge, was this little nook. So I had that same edge guide, but I had to cut it here. It's aluminum, so it's not too bad, but you need to bevel all the sides. And then it's important just to kind of dry fit this to make sure it works, make sure the grout line is going to look okay. If you can notice on the right-hand side, I actually had the grout line up with the edge so that it would look, so I wouldn't have to cut some small pieces there. And then I got it all So here's what I was mentioning. So I previously, where I get laying out, obviously I want to figure it out now, but you can see, you can't tell, but it's actually going to the side a little bit. And so when I pre-cut it, so as it got wider, or the tiles got bigger at the top, that grout line will stay perpendicular to the ground and straight up, and not run parallel to that semi-crooked line there. So again, these are all kind of, you really want to lay out, you really want to dry fit, test it, just kind of get an idea of where all the lines are, how you're going to cut. Just so you can see, here's that small one. I could have shifted it to the right a little bit, but then I would have a cut on both sides. Sometimes I find better just to put, if it's not too small, just to leave it on one side, especially that's the corner where you can't really see with the curtain in the way. But it's all preference. And so here, that grout line actually was off about maybe 1/8 of an inch, and I noticed it a little bit further down, about like 5 rows down, and so I slightly started moving it over a little bit at a time, and you can't even tell, and so it made it for a much better appearance. So that grout line is going to line up on the nook with those aluminum bullnose on the, or not bullnose, but that edge guide. So it's the same way. I'm just kind of explaining how I decide to lay out. The same way, you don't want to make this that all your edges parallel. If they're both crooked, it might look out strange. So just kind of know what's parallel, what's straight, what's out of whack. And one of the other challenges is here you can see the tile on the wall. It separates, and I go around this nook, and then at the top it's going to meet again. So you want to draw some lines and know where each one of those are, so you can keep that line, that continuous line. So actually using the laser here to mark that line all the way up, and then also vertically or horizontally, so that I'll have a good, I can keep straight grout lines straight up and across both ways, so that when I go to meet up, it's not out of whack and it's really obvious. So it's kind of a pain doing little things like this. So I'm having to use a little trowel here to get in there before I put the thin set in there, and then use the grooves to get it along. But I just want to make sure it was perfectly covered. I'm sure it doesn't have to be perfect here. There shouldn't be a lot of tension or anything moving around tiles in there, but I like to get it just right. So again, just the same way, all the other tiles, just get the grooves in there. You have, depending on the size of your tile, is the size of the groove. So just pay attention on the thin set it shows, what size grooves you need. So here I'm laying that edge piece in there and kind of setting it into the thin set so that it's going to be attached at the bottom, and then I add a little bit at the top. So when the tile goes down, it's going to actually push it into those circular grooves and hold it in place. Might be a little bit extra overkill, but I just did that. And these, when you're working with little tiles, it's really difficult to get them straight. And then also when they're back in the corners, so I'm using some of these tabs that you can break off afterwards, just so when I put these little, little cut pieces in there, I can work with them. And I'm making sure that the edge guide is flush up against the other tile. And then I found this little tool. It's really just a little hook, but it was good for kind of working the tiles, kind of moving them around, especially when you get these small tiles. They were like 1/2 inch in size. Just working on them is a little bit difficult, especially moving them all around. The first ones isn't as bad, but after you start getting all these little pieces in there and they're all moving, it's hard. So you see, I'm leveling it to the front a little bit again, so the water doesn't sit in the back there. It should roll off towards and roll out. So you can see these pieces are getting a little bit smaller. I'm having to maintain these grooves. That's why it helps having those little tabs where I can kind of pull them up a little bit and adjust it around. And I make sure I put the grout line in between the edge guide and the tile too, so they can maintain that grout line. And you hear there's a really tiny piece that I have to get back in there. Just make sure you remember which side is cut, which side has the finished edge, so that your grout looks okay. This is all getting a little bit tedious in here, but having to work on that. And then I started doing the vertical lines as well, and trying to keep them tight in the corners so it looked nice. You'll see once you get all these, there's so many pieces moving here. It's hard, you set it up like this, you start working on something, the top falls out, you get on the top, the bottom falls out. So you just have to kind of be patient here, because this tiling is all about the details and getting it, making it look nice. So don't just say, that's probably okay, because once you leave it there, it's too late. So again, going back and double checking after I've moved everything around, make sure it's flat so that the tiles above it can be parallel. I also want it to be, so you can see I got it. Luckily, it's just nice and level. And then working slowly up. So it was getting a little bit tight, so I actually started putting the grooves on the back of the tile and just almost like back buttering the thin layer on the wall. I found it was a little bit easier to work this way. And again, the same thing, you can see where you decide which side you want to cut. So I'm cutting the front side so that grout line is on the inside corner and you can only see from the sides. Versus if you cut it the other way, then the grout line would be visible. I can say that word by myself, visible. So I got a little bit tired of the tediousness, so I started working on the top, and also wanted to make sure before everything got too dried that everything was working out right, and that grout line, I maintained that across and parallel. It was coming out good, so I have spacers in there in between the tile and the edging and all the pieces. So here's where it starts getting even more tedious, especially when you're going up in the wall. But luckily, like I said, I have all the lines set up, and you can see there this was like a 3/4 inch piece, and so kind of pay attention to. So if I put the wall tile in, I would not be able to get the ceiling tile up, the final piece. So you can see it would be stuck behind there. So I put that one in first. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't jam really tight. So you can see it's all done here. Had some creative use of the spacers just to try to keep it all spaced well. I was saying, when you're going in the corners, don't jam tiles up really tight against the corners, just to give the house time to move, the grout, everything. And here's the final piece I had to cut out. Again, I just did a square one. It didn't have to be perfect because this piece that covers it gave plenty of clearance, so I didn't have to. There's no reason to make a circle and try to get it in there tight. But I'm getting towards the top. This took way longer than I expected. Especially there was other little tedious things like this where it wrapped around the tub, that it was really hard to run from the bottom. I knew the spacing I wanted at the bottom, from the bottom for the floor tile. So I pre-cut all the pieces that are going to go in here. I think it was like 4 pieces or so. And I laid them out here. I know that they're falling, or I guess it's 5 pieces and 1 cut at the bottom. But I found it was easy just to get it in there and then start working on the spacing, moving from the bottom to the top, because I wasn't exactly sure what the bottom was going to be. But I got, again, got it all in there, had a little bit of adjustment. And here was the final piece. I think I had like 320 tiles. It was exhausting. I don't know how many days, I forgot how many days it took me to do it, just because obviously I'm not a pro, so I can't do it really fast. And it took a really long time. And it felt good putting in the final piece. I knew I had to grout it. You can see I'm exhausted. Actually. So here it is, done. This is actually before I had to do the grouting. I'm going to do the grouting in a different video, but I like to just start cleaning up some of the thin set after it's dried off. Don't use a metal brush here, but a nylon kind of stiff one. Just kind of clean it up before you start working on tiling, and then get all those little spacers out, all that. And here it is, all done finally. So I came out pretty happy, or good. All the lines came out fairly straight. It all worked out. It had to cut at the top. It wasn't too bad. And then go around the door. That trim around the door is going to cover that. And then, so this is all complete. And like I said, I like the nook that came out. I'm pretty happy the way that is as well. Again, I'm going to be refinishing it after I do all the grouting and everything else. That window needs to be replaced as well. And then here was just a montage, day after day, showing how a little bit at a time I did. So it was finally